All right, it is mailbag time here on PFT PM Monday edition. Let's get right to it. At Washington Fan UK, did Heinicke do enough to warrant being the starting quarterback of the Washington football team? Charean Williams, your immediate reaction to the unexpectedly strong performance from the guy that most people can't spell his last name right, including me.
I think he certainly did enough, Mike, to warrant a contract for next season and a chance to compete for that job. I don't know if one game in the playoffs in a loss gives you a chance to be named the starting quarterback, but I certainly think he should be able to compete for that job. I expect him to have Kyle Allen back just because of Ron Rivera's love affair with Kyle Allen. We don't know about Alex Smith's future for sure, and maybe they get somebody else. Who knows what they do at that position going forward, Mike. I do think they need to have somebody they can groom to be their future quarterback, and maybe that is Taylor Heinicke. Maybe we'll see enough to know that, but at this point, I think he's done enough to at least compete for the job.
Alex Smith has a salary next year in excess of $18 million and no further guarantees on his contract, so that becomes a factor in whether or not they want to keep him. He has to decide whether he wants to play. Many would say, you've proven you can come all the way back. You make us nervous every time you're on the football field after what happened to you a couple years ago. Please call it a career and move on. He was the first overall pick in the 2005 draft. As to Heinicke, my concern would be he put it all out there. He emptied the tank. He went all out in one game, viewing that as his audition for the future. You can't play like that and be healthy week in and week out if you are a team's quarterback. You can't dive for the pylon. You can't take the physical risks he took with the season on the line. You have to dial it back or you aren't going to be available to play. And there was a point where it looked like he was going to end up in the locker room and not available. He got back and he didn't miss any time. That's my concern. You can't be that reckless week in and week out or you aren't going to be healthy enough to play a full season. And secondly, it's one thing to see what he does in one game where they weren't ready for him. It's another thing to see what he does week in and week out when you're generating film that gets studied and broken down. You pick up his tendencies, you pick up his tells, you know what he likes to do, you know what he doesn't like to do, and you're game planning against him. How good is he going to be? I was surprised that Bruce Arians, the Buccaneers coach, said after the game they wanted Alex Smith. They were concerned about Heinicke's mobility, and he failed in getting all of his players to buy into the idea that it wasn't an easy victory if Smith doesn't play, Charean. So there's potential there, but it still needs to be developed and harnessed. He has a place in the league. I don't know that he's done enough to earn a starting job because I don't think we would see that type of play week in and week out in a way that allows him to keep playing week in and week out.
Absolutely, Mike. You know, Ron Rivera said, I think it was earlier today, it might have been yesterday, that he should have had a quarterback competition before the start of this season, and he didn't do that. And they obviously named Dwayne Haskins as a starting quarterback on day one, and it didn't work out for him. Haskins is not even on the roster now. So this is a team that really looks like it's ready to compete, Mike, except at that quarterback position. There is a huge question there, and we all know if you don't have a good starting quarterback, you don't have a chance in this league.
You're absolutely right, and that is the thing that they will be looking for throughout the offseason. No stone unturned. I know some think that Cam Newton and Ron Rivera will be reunited in Washington. I will believe that when I see it. I see another question at Lynn's TRM. Do you think a Carson Wentz, Frank Reich reunion in Indianapolis would be a good idea for both parties? Charean, what do you think?
Well, you've proposed this, Mike, and I thought it was a great idea. I mean, he had his most success under Frank Reich, but now you have to wait and see who the head coach of the Eagles is. And I have a feeling that they are going to get, almost like the Houston situation, they're going to get a head coach that thinks he can anyway, revive the career of Carson Wentz. Whether he can actually do that or not, I don't know, but I think that's the direction they go. I think that a lot of Doug Peterson not being there has to do with Carson Wentz, and I think they still think, ownership I'm talking about, front office I'm talking about, still thinks Carson Wentz can be a winning quarterback in this league.
And they have to figure out who the coach is and what the coach wants. As we said earlier, they got two quarterbacks there now for the coach to choose from. And there had been this expectation Wentz was going to be on the way out. They haven't decided yet that Wentz is on the way out. If he is on the way out, then maybe you look into trading him to the Colts if the Colts are interested. There's a dance to this as well. If you seem too intent on trading a guy, you're not going to get maximum value. Look at what the Eagles did with Sam Bradford in 2016. They carried him on the roster. He was the week 1 starter, supposedly. Carson Wentz was the rookie who was going to be backing him up, supposedly. Teddy Bridgewater tears an ACL. They get a 1 and a 4 for Bradford. See you, Sam. Carson, pick up the football. You're in. That's what they will do if they get what they're looking for Carson Wentz. They're not going to do anything out of desperation, and they're not going to set it up for themselves in a way that forces their hand. And from Indy's perspective, Carson Wentz versus Phillip Rivers, if you think that Carson Wentz's performance this year was an aberration, was the product of 14 different line combinations, then it makes sense to get those two together again. But this is all part of the cloak and dagger, keep your cards close to the vest, say something other than what you believe reality of the offseason, because if you're too candid about your thoughts, about your preferences, about your plans, you end up either giving up too much to get a guy or not getting enough in return for a guy if a trade happens. Jags Walker, broken record, but what's the latest on Urban Meyer and the Jaguars? Timeline and possible GM pairing. Someone told me today that Urban Meyer is waiting until after tonight's national championship game, Ohio State-Clemson. Doesn't want to do anything to take away from Ohio State. He's still got the loyal following there. He's still viewed as kind of like coach emeritus. They still love him there. So he doesn't want to do anything to screw that up. So maybe tomorrow these discussions or whatever it is that's going on between the Jaguars and Urban Meyer will continue. Charean, look, this is his job if he wants it. The Jaguars have made zero effort in the last 2 weeks to push back against this perception. If it's not true, they need to get a PR person on the phone with everyone in the media who's saying this is where it's going and saying you're wrong. That's how it works. Hasn't happened. So it's Myers if he wants it. Does he want it? Do they want to pay him what he wants? These are all things to be worked out. As to the GM candidates, Scott Pioli was one of the names that I've heard. Trent Baalke, who's the GM there for now, is a possibility. And another name that popped up this weekend, Ray Farmer, the former Browns GM. Apparently there's a relationship between the two from their mutual time in Ohio to keep an eye on, Charean. But Meyer, if he takes the job, not just hiring coaching staff, he's hiring the GM, which means he's in charge of that football operation with no NFL head coaching experience.
And I think that's another clue, Mike, the fact that they haven't hired a GM yet, that Urban Meyer will do that hiring if he gets hired as the head coach. And I think that's a clue that they haven't moved on the GM job like, say, Houston has with getting Nick Caserio in there, letting him hire the head coach, or Deshaun Watson hiring the head coach, however that works out. But the fact that they haven't hired that GM yet and are going to let Urban Meyer do that, I think that's another clue, Mike, that this is who they really want. They've zeroed in on him, and it's his job if he wants it. Now the question is, does he want it? I believe he will be the next head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Just a feeling.
There are still some people who think he will get to the brink and he will say, this isn't for me. He's 56. And he's got a history of being highly successful at the college level. The Nick Saban example is something that I would study as closely as possible because Saban hated the first year, was tormented the second year, couldn't wait to get out, and landed at Alabama, and look at what's happened for him there. And the fact that the Lions aren't in on Meyer tells me that Chris Spielman, who knows Urban Meyer, knows that he would be too tormented by life in the NFL to ever be functional at a high level on a sustained basis as an NFL head coach. Let's jam in one more here, Dr. J144. Are people serious when they ask if Mitchell Trubisky deserves more time in Chicago? He's had 4 years. He's due to become a free agent. They didn't pick up his fifth-year option. He will hit the market unless they sign him to a new contract or use the franchise tag. Don't hold your breath for that. Do you think that Trubisky and Matt Nagy should continue, assuming Nagy and Ryan Pace are both back as GM and head coach?
I think that it's time for Mitchell Trubisky to move on somewhere else and see if he still has something in him to become a good quarterback, something like Ryan Tannehill did and leaving Miami to go to Tennessee, Mike. I just think he needs a fresh start somewhere else other than Chicago to see if he can make it work.
And that's the thing if you're the Bears. If he leaves and he does really well somewhere else, boy, you're going to look stupid. And think about that. They took Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. They traded up a spot to get Trubisky over Mahomes and Watson. The absolute worst-case scenario for the Bears would be Trubisky to go somewhere else and become a star. I don't put the chances of that happening are very high, but wouldn't that be the ultimate slap in the face for Bears fans?
Yes. Oh, absolutely it would, Mike. And they have to hope that that doesn't happen, but it definitely could.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.